Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Generallotz, and today I'm joined with Reignick. And today we are going to be taking a close look at a rather obscure OVA. You see, Starship Troopers was a novel first released in the 1950s that would get a, shall we say, wide release in 1997 with the release of a film of dubious quality. But before that film of dubious quality, there was an OVA released only in Japan, simply called Starship Troopers. It was a 6-episode OVA that was about as different from the film as you could possibly get, and was a bit closer to the book itself.
Yep, this was basically Bandai and Emotion's version of the book. It does differ a little bit, but it's closer into the book that it's not about the propaganda and the nature of it. It's about what the book was. It's about the people.
Now, I first discovered Starship Troopers as the film in 1997. Prior to that point, I'd never even heard of Starship Troopers. And I gotta say, that film of dubious quality, well, even back as a kid, about 8 years old, I was like, well, why don't they actually, like just drop nukes out of like the bombers? Wouldn't that make a lot more sense than just massed infantry charges? I would discover the book when I was about 14 years old, and ironically, the cover was designed in such a way as to advertise the film, and the book was very, very different. In fact, Starship Troopers, the novel, is a completely different property altogether. I would discover the OVA around 2010, just randomly looking for sci-fi anime via Wikipedia. Unfortunately, I could never actually find the OVA, be it either on YouTube or any other locations. And I wouldn't actually get a chance to see it until around 2015 or so.
Yeah, I started out with the book basically because I was a huge sci-fi nerd as a kid. I remember that for me as a kid, this is the late 80s, early 90s. And then I saw the Verhoeven film, and while I did kind of appreciate the Verhoeven film in its own way, I remember Verhoeven is the same guy who directed RoboCop. He made it into a movie which is vastly different than the book in the fact that it's more of a scathing black comedy slash analysis of the rhetoric and the propaganda as opposed to the story of people. I greatly appreciated the book more because it's a far deeper story, and, well, Hollywood at the time would never allow that story to be told on any silver screen.
What's kind of funny about the book before, and the book's idea is comes across very well in the OVA. The idea of the book was more or less that of a coming of age story more than anything else.
Very much so. It's a coming of age story. It's a story of how a group has to come together in this situation to either fight to survive or die trying. It's the book focuses mostly on the training more than anything else and the characters, while the movie is an action romp which uses it. Let me rephrase. It is an action movie, but it uses that as really a background for telling a story about propaganda, about being propagandized, and about humanity at times not quite being up to snuff to what's being put out there.
Whereas in the book, it was you come for the giant robots and you stay for the philosophy more than anything else.
Pretty much. You're gonna you're gonna see a lot of people politicize Starship Troopers in all forms. In fact, it's happening right now, and Verhoeven is not immune to this, and it's not pretty.
But then again, it's Hollywood. And as we all know, there's a fairly virulent disease that's gotten around out there. But we need not let that detain us at this time. So, with that, let's take a look at the first 3 episodes of the OVA.
All right, we open with an explosion and a mobile infantry member in full-powered battle armor moving forward through rough terrain, being followed and eventually outpaced by a land-bound tank-treaded drone trying to take down a unknown enemy. There's shots of basically energy being fired at them. We don't know the source. But if you've read the books, you know this is a plasma bug. One of the soldiers gets a direct hit scored on them, full headshot, completely, utterly just destroys this guy, and he's still firing his rifle due to dead man's grip. Rigor mortis is pretty much set in. From here, we get two more mobile infantry members coming onto the scene to join the battle. One taking a direct hit of plasma to the torso, killing him instantly. The other one does manage to continue on without being hit, but the first one that got hit, dead man triggers their launcher. Now, in the Starship Troopers universe, those launchers are not just mortars or RPGs. They're miniature nukes. The entire squad is wiped. We see a planetary view of unknown, as of now, unknown planet. But those of you who've read the novels, you know what planet this is, and we'll come to that eventually. From here, we get the title sting and our introduction, visually, to the main character, Juan Johnny Rico, who, in this case, is looking rather blonde for someone who's supposed to be of Filipino birth and born in New Buenos Aires. But, hey, you take what you get. And remember, in the Heinlein's writings, race isn't a thing. No one cares. You're human. That's the only race that matters. Our first real scene outside of this conflict is Daniel High versus the Barons in a football game. Daniel High is down 17-22. They're down with 15 seconds in the fourth quarter. You see the team in a huddle. Johnny is their receiver. Problem is, Johnny is a little bit out of the game right now. Right now, he's thinking of a cheerleader, Carmencita, which I can't blame him for, but get your head in the game, Rico. They line up their play. They go. Quarterback snaps it. It's looking good. Right up until Johnny gets completely lambasted by two defensive ends. Just knocked smooth out, just short of the goal line. That's right. Our hero is not exactly the Mary Sue. He boffs it. He boffs it hard. Our hero is human. Take that, Hollywood. Daniel High loses. It's a very stark contrast to the Verhoeven movie. From this, we cut to our graduation celebration where Carmen is receiving a bouquet and Johnny declines to follow up with what he wanted to tell Carmen because, well, he lost and he doesn't feel quite up to it after having his ego ground into the dirt. From there, he opts to just pound back drinks, kind of, wallowing in self-pity. From here, we're introduced to another major character into the series, his friend Carl. He arrives on the scene, confronts Johnny about both the loss and his inability to talk with Carmencita, and basically ribs him a bit before literally pushing Johnny just to freaking talk with Carmen, just dragging him all the way. He almost gets his chance until he's interrupted by the crowd announcing they want to go to the beach. So everyone piles up. They drive to the beach. This scene, we kind of see that Carl's got really good taste in cars. He's got a yellow convertible Airsats 57 Chevy. I say Airsats because, well, this is 1988. The animation is good. The animation is very good. But, mech design, you're not getting a 57 Chevy 100% detail correct on that budget. It's not happening. From here, he and Carl are kind of discussing their plans, and he mentions to Carl that he's envious to him because he's got everything figured out. That you're joining the the Federation military when you're fully graduated and all that. You've got everything laid out for you. To wit, Carl just turns and is like, dude, you're rich. You're inheriting your dad's company when you get out. You got everything set up for you. So there's a little bit of back and forth there, and a little bit of introspection as which is the better choice. Would it be to seek your own adventure, or would it be to safely have one handed to you? Unfortunately, this conversation's cut short as Johnny, having pounded back probably too many drinks and far too much spiked punch, falls asleep in the back of the car as they finally arrive at the beach. Johnny, this is why you don't pound back alcohol. You miss a lot of life's details. He wakes up just in time to see the sunrise, and it really kind of affects him. Thankfully, he also wakes up in time to realize that Carmen, is sitting on the back of the trunk, kind of having a bit of a laugh at him. Not like in a mean way, just in a, wow, you were out of it last night sort of way. At the discussion he had we cut again, and from here, Johnny realizes that, you know what, screw this, I'm enlisting. Well, he does this without telling his family. Not a smart move, and don't ever do this if you're young enough to do this. Talk to your family. They gave birth to you, they raised you, you owe them that. His mother Maria does not take this well at all, and she is beside herself. To try to talk it through, Johnny and his father take a midnight ride, to which explains the father's the Rico family company, Rico Foods, is a rather large conglomerate that provides a lot of organic and natural grown foods to off-world colonists. He also surprises the fact that surprises Johnny in the fact that Johnny's dad's a smoker. He's been hiding this fact from his mother, and in this future, in the federated worlds, tobacco's kind of rare. So it kind of throws Johnny for a loop. From here, his father reveals to them that he's afraid that the Federation is going to go to war, for the simple fact that Rico Foods is being a pretty massive upswell in foods preserved for long-term storage fit for frontline infantry use. From here, Johnny thinks, okay, well, I'm going to need some time to kind of gather my thoughts, and tells his dad to drive back home. He'll walk back home. To which his dad does. A few hours pass. Johnny's walk is done. He comes back in, and he sees his mother. His mother hasn't moved an inch. She's still sitting there at the table, head in hands, just frozen in grief. This kind of affects Johnny pretty hard. He goes upstairs and just kind of passes out thinking about, was my choice the right choice? It's a pretty heavy decision to lay on. The next day, he wakes up. Carl shows up and hands him a disc saying he's received an unencrypted broadcast that he's been spying on. It's military footage, and the fact that it's unencrypted, not exactly per protocol, and not exactly something that should get out. The unencrypted video feed that he's got was from the battle that we saw. Soldiers facing an unknown enemy, dying in droves. Instead of demotivating Johnny and Carl, it actually does the opposite. It actually motivates them to continue, just to stick with their enlistment. From here, Carl and Johnny part ways. Johnny kind of celebrates from the idea of thinking that, I'm going to be the hero. Proceeds to celebrate, and in his room, it's a spiral staircase, and the center pole, he spins around it and uses it to launch himself up, and carelessly concusses himself on the roof. Right on the ceiling, just boom. From here, we get a news report of the cruise starship Queen Alexandria returning to Earth. Johnny talks to his father, remarking, "You're home early." And we cut to a military report of the general announcing the outer colony planets have been attacked by an unknown enemy force, and they're dispatching the main fleet to deal with such. Johnny's been accepted. He doesn't know what branch yet, but he knows that he's been accepted for federal military service, and rides off. On his ride, he finds his mother. He stops, turns off the bike, goes over to talk to her. And here is where his mother slaps the 7 shades of a Jesus right clean off his face. Indignantly after that slap, she wishes him goodbye and walks away in a rather terse manner. Johnny goes to the base and realizes, yeah, you were accepted all right, right into the mobile infantry.
And now we begin episode 2, Hendrik. Now, one of the things you have to remember about the mobile infantry is that it's not just some bottom-of-the-barrel organization. This is something that's serious. Actually getting to pilot a mobile suit is not something that is fairly simple. So this sort of implies that Rico himself is actually at least somewhat competent and somewhat physically fit. But what we're going to be taking a look at primarily in episode 2 is training. So we open to the flight of the Queen Alexandria as it voyages through space, presumably back to Earth, as reported. There's a bit of foreboding as there are a number of inhuman eyes and faces inside a cargo bay. And of course, it docks with an orbital station over Earth. Now, this orbital station looks really good. It actually has a good sense of scale as well. We, of course, then get to the training facility, where we see quite a few young recruits being educated via a rather concussive means. We got Craig Patterson and Theodore C. Hendrik try their luck with the instructor, a Sergeant Zim. Now, those of you who saw the 97 film of dubious quality, that particular Sergeant Zim was played by the Kurgan. This guy is just about as awesome as the Kurgan himself. So what we got here is, of course, a 2-on-1 battle, where Craig is throttled and then thrown. Hendrik gets his arm captured and dislocated, and is then ordered to the infirmary for a joint reset in a 3-hour rest. The rest of the unit is ordered to have a forced march. This, of course, is something that happened in the novel. What's really funny, though, is all of these training segments that we're going to see in episode 2 would be repeated ad nauseum throughout pretty much all the various military science fiction books you can imagine. You know, every time there's a new Spec Marine in Warhammer 40k, they pretty much go through all of this stuff. Had it not been for Heinlein, we would not have this particular trope. Now, Johnny himself is, of course, fairly soft from a fairly rich civilian life. Sure, he was a football player, but he's never had to go on a forced march. We then get cut to an argument in the barracks, which Hendrik starts. Sergeant Jim breaks it up by ordering another forced march, because, as we all know from military science fiction, the staff sergeants will always be saying PT, PT, PT until you die. Cut to infantry training with less lethal simulation M16 rifles with brown furniture that makes it more look like an AR-10. And not altogether that futuristic, despite this supposed to be some sort of future. What we have here is yet another 80s future, where you have mobile suits along with floppy disks. Sergeant Zim absolutely tears into his recruits that are too dumb to figure out how to survive. We're talking about like they just stand in the middle of a field gormlessly as they kind of shoot in the general direction of the enemy. We get a montage of survivable simulated failure deaths. Basically, they got a bunch of paintball guns. And, well, they don't die, but they definitely make themselves look kind of stupid. In the barracks, after the constant failure training montage, it's revealed that Johnny is the only one of the lot that does not actually have a girlfriend. This I like, because once again it shows that Johnny is an actual human character, and not just a Marty Stew. We cut to knife-throwing training, and I'm sure many of you will remember this from the 97 film, where Gary Busey's son gets his hand nailed to the side of a wall. That doesn't actually happen here. Sergeant Zim is busting Hendricks' chop, stating that, "Are your targets other recruits?" because Hendricks is kind of throwing his knife where the other recruits are standing. Hendricks asks about the purpose of knife throwing when the enemy has other dangerous weapons. Sergeant Zim, of course, corrects him, stating that there are no dangerous weapons, only dangerous people. Because remember, ladies and gentlemen, there is no such thing as a dangerous object, only dangerous minds. Hendricks counters that if we use nukes, the enemy is gone in a flash. To it, Sergeant Zim replies, "Do you want to use nukes?" This is something that is not really featured in the 97 film. 97 film is like they let nukes off fairly consistently, whereas you have to remember, in this OVA it's made in Japan, and they definitely have a history with nuclear weapons. So anytime nukes are brought up, they're treated quite seriously. A knife is then thrown by Sergeant Zim into the throat of a target, and his point is indeed understood. We then have the unit of recruits humping a rock in the scorching desert heat with no water or brakes. I'm not sure if they'd actually be able to survive this, but it makes for a fairly entertaining scene. They're all showing signs of fatigue, and the unit sees the second-year recruits moving in mobile armor suits, with Hendricks having collapsed, stating, "Even a baby could move across this desert easy in those." Well, I'm not sure they know how, but whatever. We later cut to the unit suiting up in similar powered armor, as Sergeant Zim, always a man of sharp tongue, tells them to hurry it up and get moving onto the field. Johnny, completely unfamiliar with the suit and nervous, falls flat on his side. Most of the unit is woefully ungraceful in the suits. This is something that's also brought up in many other science fiction productions, where the mech suits are just always hard to figure out, which I wonder if that's actually true in real life. We'll just have to see as more and more get manufactured. Hendrick is sort of a cocky bastard and is claiming it's easy right before he turns on his thrusters, unbalancing his suit, and he takes a face-first dive into the pavement. As you can see, Hendrick's kind of an idiot. Zim busts his chop like any good drill sergeant would. Rico overcompensates trying to get up from the fall, launching his suit into the hangar wall. Sergeant Zim remarking, "Are you trying to destroy the hangar? It's worth more than you." Back to the barracks, we find the suit training is taking quite a toll on the recruits, as their joints are stiff and sore from overuse. Johnny's neck pops like it's been carrying a load on his shoulder for miles, and you actually can hear it. And it does indeed sound like, piloting a mobile suit is not an easy prospect. Second outing, Johnny is having to force himself into learning how to... is trying to force himself to learn how to walk yet again. Because not only are you trying to move your leg, you're also trying to move the mech suit's leg as well. Zim is, of course, pushing the recruits hard, and Hendricks tries to show off in making up for being the slowest individual in the unit, and he doesn't really succeed in making himself look any better, because he launches his suit high into the air in an attempt to jump, and he lands on his face again. Sergeant Zim disembarks from the suit to check on Hendricks, saying, "If you love the ground that much, why don't you plant your face in it and kiss it?" pulling him from his suit and telling him in no subtle means that the suit magnifies the user's strengths and movements. If you were excited to see your mother, would you hug her with all your might? You'd break her bones to pieces. This, of course, is a concept that would later be seen in a wide variety of other science fiction elements as well. One example, of course, is the Master Chief in Halo First Strike. When he shakes the hand of one of his COs, he's thinking that with his level of strength and the strength of the Mjolnir Mark V suit, that he could literally pulverize the guy's bones. Let's see here. Hendricks snaps because he's tired of constantly being made to look at a fool, and punches Sergeant Zim in the face. Zim, being a badass, takes the punch without flinching. Lesson for the day: never piss off a drill sergeant. Hendrick is shocked that Zim doesn't actually dodge, but of course Zim is trying to prove a point. Zim just re-embarks to his suit, commanding the unit to continue training. Hendricks gets off lucky this time. Cut to an airport. As a plane touches down, Johnny's mother, Maria, is looking at a picture of her son. She is greeted by a friend who is supposed to be underway as a passenger of the Queen Alexandria. At first, she appears to be lucky, but we shall see what happens later. She, of course, complains that the luggage shuttle will not reach the destination until Friday. We end up cutting back to the base after this, and the unit has been put on firefighter duty, which is very weird but not a bad idea for training. Hendrix is bitching about having to go through this particular training element, but he already knows but he knows that this is already a mission that he has to go on, because while this is punishment duty, the punishment could have been a lot worse. He could have actually been sent to the firing squad. Now, of course, something similar to this happened in the 97 movie, except with Rico, who did something idiotic and he ended up getting whipped for it. This, I think, is a much more visually interesting form of punishment. We end up cutting back, just before the firefighter duty, to the airport as we see a shuttle arriving. This is actually some interesting intercutting. We intercut this event at an airport with the firefighter duty of our heroes. The shuttle does arrive, but there's no announcement. Maria finds this odd, and there's a variety of emergency personnel being sent to the scene, but for whatever reason she doesn't actually notice this all that much. And ultimately, something very bad happens. There's a blast of unknown energy, and it's launched towards the terminal, but it does not immediately just destroy the entire building. Cut with this, we see the firefighting exercise. We've got Smith, and we got Rico, and we got Hendrick. Smith charges in and starts shooting his phased plasma extinguishing cannon. Hendrick is paralyzed with fear because while he has a big mouth, he's not particularly brave. Eventually, Rico charges in and he sprays a few things, but then Hendrix charges in and acts like the fire is attacking him and just shoots his load like you wouldn't believe. Eventually, Hendrix leaves. Rico is lambasted for not using his extinguisher, but he doesn't know where to aim. He doesn't have a clue where to actually start. Back at the airport, chaos is indeed ensuing as a good chunk of the terminal is being razed by explosions. The ship looks to be infected by some sort of organic alien of some description that's shooting organic lasers. Basically, it's shooting in all directions, and a wide variety of things are being blown up. We actually see a really cool scene of a fighter craft trying to destroy it. Then we have a artistic scene where Mary and Maria are running for their lives. Mary twists her ankle, and this is just, we can assume they're dead here, but it's done in a very abstract manner. We don't actually see them get blown up, just everything kind of fades to white. Back at the fire, Johnny locates a survivor, and he wants to go save him. When this happens, Smith is knocked down due to a backdraft in the building, and Johnny uses the last of his fire extinguisher contents to save Smith. Johnny finally gets the hang of the suit, kind of magically, just like, it's a second skin! Which I guess makes sense, or is just audio-visual shorthand. He rescues the survivor, but in a somewhat humorous scene, he gets punched in the face yet again by Sergeant Zim for disobeying orders to withdraw to the base immediately. This is one of those things where, like, when you're ordered to do something, you have to do it immediately and not just sort of undertake things on your own. My brain has stopped working. What is the word I'm thinking of? Initiative. Finally, we got it. Eventually, we cut to the Titan sound of the battle at the airport, and we can see that this is another artistic scene. We see a photo of Johnny and his mother, and the photo, of course, burns, showing that the war has officially begun. At the very last part of the episode, we have Hendrick washing out, because, once again, he's got a big mouth, but he just doesn't have what it takes. And as we'll see in the next episode, everyone thinks it was a pretty good idea that he got out when the getting was good. One thing that's different here from, I think, what would have been seen in American production is he's just wished well by the rest of the unit. He's not lambasted for not having what it takes, which I think is which is probably more of a Japanese thing, where the group harmony is sort of they try to maintain that more. At the end of the episode, we see that Johnny and the rest of his unit are on a ruck march, and he contemplates on how best to write a letter to Carmen.
Okay. From here, we go into episode 3, Maria. From this, we open to the scene of the base as Johnny is gathering his thoughts and trying to not sound like a complete and total nebbish when writing to Carmen. He reports his units to spend training rotation on the moon, as well as a cadre of naval officers are embarking. He notices while his group is waiting to embark the ship the naval officers, they're comparing each other and they're saying they're just completely different from the ground pounders. And immediately, all the ground pounders, all the soon-to-be roughnecks are loudly oogling and wolf whistling the female officers. Never, ever do this unless you really like peeling potatoes for a long time. Johnny spots Carmen and is none too silent about it. He is acknowledged by Carmen with a wave because that's really about as best she can do because she's on a time schedule and it's Federation Navy. You don't keep them waiting. And from this, the rest of his unit sort of kind of rib him about it, saying, "Oh, so that's your girlfriend, huh?" From here, we cut to the final ship preparations, countdown, and launch. Ship enters orbit. Crew quarters are going. Sergeant Zim enters. And as they were making small talk, they quickly go into proper drill, which means Zim's doing his job. So they go to officer on deck mode. They stop razzing and cheering up Johnny to get him out of his daze and force all recruits to, proper military trade. Stand at attention, be proper. Zim announces that all recruits are to go to Central Area under orders. Captain Frankel's the one who issued the orders. They show up and they realize this isn't standard training procedure. This is a briefing. From here, they're shown footage of what happened at New Buenos Aires Airport. It's basically, they see the entire war footage and they see the destruction. From here, that Captain Frankel addresses the unit, saying that Hathaway will be declaring a state of emergency. To wit, one of his officers state that we should declare it a war, but we don't know who we're going to war with. From here, we're told during the briefing that over 1 million people died that night in New Buenos Aires. So, yeah, the alien force, the unknown force that's attacking, ain't screwing around. The reason for the training acceleration on the moon is because, well, this is a direct attack on Earth. This is the mother planet. So, this is condition red. We cut from here to the barracks of the moon base. Soldiers are shaking the idea of war on a galactic scale with an unknown enemy. Some particularly go on about how they were only in the service for the pay. Others had never even conceived of the notion of going to a war of that scale before enlisting. From this, we cut to the unit suiting up for the first planetary drop. From here, they'll be going into training. They realize that the risk is great, it's very real, and if you do not land the jump properly, death in training is a real possibility. This is a real possibility in real life, too. You fail a paradrop, you can die. You fail rappelling, you can die. Death in training happens, so you got to be careful. Not a place for screwing around. They're told that their suit's oxygen in this environment will give them a 20-minute operational window with the on-board oxygen supplies they have per suit. And failure to come back within that time parameter will most certainly result in death, and that suit being their coffin. Rather expensive coffin. From here, the suit functions are checked. Vectored Vernier thrusters are given a final check. And once cleared, Sergeant Zim individually gives them the order to launch and prepare for drop. Well, the first recruit out of the launch chute lands rather poorly on their back because he lost balance. But he's alive, uninjured. Suit's operational. Suit did its job. Johnny's launch goes about the same, if not a slight bit worse. Although Johnny manages to stick the landing, sort of. He loses balance about midway through his arc and almost has to backwards curl, almost akin to a backflip, to which Zim is just screaming in his ear, You want to be an acrobat? You'd be the perfect target. It's been real. You'd have been dead. To which, he's not wrong. I mean, from a landing like that, unless you're ready to hit the ground running and fight, yeah, you're dead. We cut a little bit of downtime to the PX or BX center, depending on what type of base you're at the moon base. We're informed they're enjoying their downtime. This is right before any drills or any briefings. And Ozma comes onto the scene and reveals that a member of Sergeant Harr's unit died in training. He didn't stick the landing. It kind of hits everyone a little bit hard, and you can tell it hits Johnny hard, the thought of it. Smith just kind of remarks, dying in training. How ridiculous. I'd rather die in the battlefield. And everyone's taken aback by stunned silence. Johnny specifically. I mean, he's kind of like, I don't know how to treat that, but okay. The situation washes over him. He's starting to get the gravity of it. It's like, this is not exactly the play that we had back in high school. This ain't football. And he manages to spot Carmen, calling her out, and he gets off the escalator. His unit staying behind because, proper rules of being a gentleman. Don't get in the way of a friend who's trying to talk to a potential love interest. They kind of have an awkward talk, and it's kind of befitting their age. Because remember, this is a coming of age story, and they're both kind of coming off the awkward teenage phase. He informs, Carmen that they'd really like to talk more. And Carmen tells him, "Oh yeah, I got your letter." And from here, Johnny asks Carmen for a photo. Not an odd request, but yeah, it's doable. Up until the worst moment that could possibly happen, does possibly happen. Right behind Carmen is the barber shop. Patrick, a member of Johnny's unit, comes right out. And remember, Patrick has only seen Carmen from behind, so he asks Johnny, "Did you get that nude photo?" Worst possible thing you could say in the presence of a naval flight officer. Johnny gets the bejesus slapped out of him, and hard. To it, Maria turns on heel and walks away indignant. Johnny's thoughts this time are, "I've seen this scene before." We immediately cut to a scene of Ozma kicking Patrick in the back of the head. Which is a good thing, because at least Johnny knows that, hey, I got at least one wingman on my crew. From this, we kind of transition to the second day of jump training. And the recruits under Zim's training seem to be faring a lot better. And this is a good thing, because this is not just jump training. This is jump training into a forced march and a quote-unquote live fire simunition exercise. They're instructed that they're to go one click north to a point they call Dawn Junction, where their targets will be quote-unquote cute little prairie dogs. Now, I'm in the South, and I was born a Texan. I've never met a prairie dog which had control of drone guns, because that's exactly what they're facing. It's an up-armored redoubt in the middle of essentially a Martian crater, with remote-controlled drone guns aplenty, firing large-caliber simunitions, essentially paint-marking rounds. En route, they're running. This is no longer a forced march. This is a full sprint. Ozma's the first one to go. He takes a headshot just directly, and the realization of it sets into him as the red paint is just dripping down the front of his visor, and he realizes, "Yep, I'm dead." He didn't even get a chance to get a shot in. He's told to retreat. From here, we get the rest of the team running in, and one by one, one is picked off, and you know, each one is KIA or just run down as combat ineffective. Patrick's hit in order to fall back. The hit's so direct it knocks him onto the back of his armor.
Rico then tries to blind fire from cover, but his rifle is hit, which is a pretty lucky hit, I have to say, and he's ordered to drop it, as that would, of course, make the firearm combat ineffective. Greg runs out of ammo for his rifle and is ordered to drop it instead of reload. Once again, this is a training exercise, and it's supposed to be the worst outcome possible. Rico manages to plant a mock grenade into one of the turrets, disabling it before he is immediately gunned down by the other turrets in sort of a comedic scene. Cutting away to the barracks, the rest of the unit applauds him on actually succeeding to blow up something right before he dies heroically. They congratulate him, and then, of course, we have a mail call. Sadly, the old gunny doesn't show up with the mail, but we get Azuma tossing out some mail. Now, the news is mixed. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. Actually, most of it's bad. We got Patrick giving a Dear John letter. Now, earlier in the OVA series, we actually saw that Patrick's girlfriend was actually more of, shall we say, a woman friend. She looked to be about 20 years his senior. But whatever, we need not let that detain us. We, of course, get a much worse letter, and that is, of course, Rico learning that his mother died in the attack along with 1 million others. Now, this is an OVA. This is a Japanese production. In an American production, he'd be screaming, "No!" and all the rest. This, he just kind of shuts down emotionally. And we cut to the third exercise. Essentially, Rico just cannot really function, and his entire Byade squad is wiped out. And at the debriefing, Sergeant Zim yells at them, "Are you trying to break your battlesuits on purpose?" And for their lack of teamwork, all the members of the unit is assigned to latrine duty. Now, one of the squad members, Smith, is questioning Johnny as they clean all of the bathrooms on the station. Now, the sub I saw calls all the bathrooms crappers, which is absolutely hilarious to me, as that's not often what a bathroom is called these days, at least. Patrick gets rather irritated and demands that Johnny explain why he is acting so strangely. Johnny can just barely mumble out sorry, and that, of course, just makes things worse. And eventually Patrick, of all people, now Patrick is a fairly nice, kind of gormless kind of guy, he punches him straight in the face. This happens a lot to Johnny, it seems. And he eventually collapses. Greg reveals that he picked up the letter that Johnny dropped, and he knows that Rico's mother died in the New Buenos Aires attack. And he even does admit that, yeah, he probably should have said it earlier, but didn't want to. Johnny feigns it off, saying that, we have to fight regardless of who dies. Because once again, this is sort of a Japanese thing, and of course he's not going to go like, "My mother died," and start crying. That's not going to happen here. Eventually, there's a go team go kind of moment where everybody pulls together now that they know why Johnny was acting so weirdly. And eventually, everybody kind of pulls together in a very happy scene at the end, with one of the jokers of the squad pulling out a expropriated bottle of alcohol, and the entire episode ends in a fairly positive manner.
Generally, it does, and it is very important at this point. Realize that the main thing behind the novels and this adaptation of novels is teamwork. Nobody wins a war on their own. Nobody wins a battle of a larger scale on their own.
So wait, all those commercials about it being an army of one, that was a lie?
Yeah. Smart bombs are useless without smart people, but you need smart people to work as a team.
So yes, the art style for the entire OVA is nothing short of excellent. 2D animation really, it just cannot be beat by modern day 3D crap. Now, not all 3D animation is bad, but damn does it look good. There are details aplenty in everything.
Yeah, there's very few frames where things are rushed or, really broken. Granted, this is not the same budget as some of the Masamune Shiro productions, but a lot of the art design helps carry a lot of it. And the design of the mechs was done by Kazutaka Miyatake of Studio Nue, and that's a story unto itself. But Studio Nue has done a lot of really, really good mech designs. This is definitely among them.
And it's a really cool mech design. It's not just your typical Gundam ripoff. There's all kinds of uh, vents and things of that nature. There's thrust nozzles all over the place. It just looks like what you would expect a realistic mech to look like.
Yeah, it's somewhere between a powered exoskeleton, what our concepts of it should be, and a actual vectored thrust vehicle, which is meant to fight in 3 dimensions, as opposed to it's the usual 2 to 2.5 a standard human can. It kind of armored spacesuitish, but it makes sense given the environments these people are going into. Very practical.
And I think Bungie must have taken some inspiration from them because it looks a lot like Mjolnir 5, especially in the visor area.
Actually, they did take a lot of inspiration from this. While, like I say, this is pretty much the most obscure adaptation of classic sci-fi you're going to ever see, or more importantly, not see, because unfortunately, as much as I like saying, support the original author, support the original release, you really can't do that here because it was never released in the US. The rights are literally about as close to hell as you can get for any property whatsoever. And the last release of this was on Laserdisc back in 1988. The design of everything is very practical. It's very thought out. Kazutaka really went out of his way to think, okay, well, let's try to give something which would make sense scale wise, but with extant or near future tech would be, it would be feasible. I would rank this right up there with like the power loader from Aliens in terms of design. It's very utilitarian. It's something you could see, like the power loader from Aliens. You could see someone like Caterpillar or Toyota coming out with that in the next 15, 16 years if they research went right.
We also get some Aliens sound effects as well. Power loader sound effects, no less.
Hey, it works. That's why I brought it up. It's one of those that if they've got a good idea, sometimes cribbing a good idea can work.
I think the most kind of hilarious piece of art design, though, is Rico himself. And it's not that he doesn't look like what you would expect a Filipino to look like, but the fact that he looks a lot like Ken Masters in Street Fighter 1.
Yeah, pretty much. I would say the inspiration kind of split over, but it really didn't. It's just one of those weird things that two ideas were very, very similar, but spawned completely isolated from one another at the same time. It's almost kind of creepy in the fact that how it all played out.
Yeah, that's just the way it goes. So, what about the writing?
The writing is very, very close to Heinlein's original idea for Starship Troopers. Now, I say this being a fan of the Verhoeven original movie. The Verhoeven original movie is, as stated, it is scathing black comedy and parody of propagandizing, of people. That said, this is far closer to the original intent, the original spirit, and the original thought experiment of the book. Understand that this book is required reading in every United States Naval Academy. You find a Navy officer who's a commissioned officer, they will have read this book. There's required playing and there's required reading. Required playing is Harpoon. Required reading is Starship Troopers. And you will have to write an essay on Starship Troopers at any of these naval academies. This is closer to that. It reflects the spirit of the book. It does change details. It's not perfect. But it's as close to the spirit of the book and adaptation as you're going to get.
And one thing that's kind of interesting about the book is the book, of course, is going to be much more. It's going to be much more harder core, I suppose, is the best way to put it. During the training segment, they're kind of left out in the desert at night. And there's actually a scene with them all having to huddle together for warmth. On a movie, that might look kind of silly, but in the book, it just kind of shows you just how precarious their existence is.
Survival training with the military, if you're going to be an elite unit, you better get used to that. There's going to be some times when your bunkmate is going to get uncomfortably close to you. So because it's either that or die.
Exactly, and that's just something you're not going to see in a Hollywood production. I think the thing that really separates Starship Troopers the OVA from the Hollywood movie is the fact that the Hollywood movie feels like a Hollywood movie. Yeah, it's supposed to be a comedy, but even if it wasn't, most Hollywood sci-fi just feels very limited. It feels very light. Whereas everything that happens in this anime feels very heavy. Everything feels like it has a weight to it. When you hear 1 million people died, you can believe that that happened.
Yeah, the thing is, while this compared to the book it does come off quite a bit lighter because there's no situations like the book where Johnny is facing getting 5 lashes for a certain incident, which I'm not going to spoil. Read the book. Trust me, I'm doing a service for you. Read the book. Can't say that enough. But it's not as over the top as, well, you're getting, would you like to know more? And all of these information blasts and things like that. Don't get me wrong. I love Verhoeven. I love him for the scathing black comedy he does, but at the same time, I kind of dislike the guy. And I know you'll get a lot of people who will say, "Oh, you should learn to separate the art from the artist." That's always been a point of contention for me. It's never made sense. Would you separate the plumbing from a plumber? I wouldn't.
Yeah, I can understand that. It depends on my mood. Like sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. I can go either way depending on what the actual art is and just how bad the artist is. Case in point, kind of like Halloween 2018. Yeah, you got Jamie Lee Curtis being fairly anti-gun, but you know what? Whatever. It's still just a slasher movie, so I can kind of just ignore that. I think the 97 Starship Troopers movie is very meme-tastic, but it really kind of lacks a good level of meat, so to speak. Like, the OVA is very meaty in what it does. Whereas the 97 film, like, you can watch it just for scenes. Like, Michael Ironside is great at it, but you really only want to watch that. The Sergeant Zim scene where he nails somebody's hand to the wall, that's a very memorable scene, but just taken as a whole, that 97 movie's just, in every sense of the word, popcorn.
Very much so. It was created as a Hollywood blockbuster, and that's part of the reason why you probably won't see a true adaptation of Heinlein's writing as, brought to the cinema. It's not popcorn. It's not, summer, this in a world. It's not Mr. Movie Tone worthy. It's not something that is an easy sell to your average audience who just wants to see things explode on screen. It's not lowbrow cinema.
I can just picture in a world where citizens must be determined by their abilities versus just by being born, something like that. It wouldn't really work. Because a lot of Heinlein stuff is very philosophical in what it is and what it does. I mean, Starship Troopers is by far the most popular of his work, but much of his other stuff, I think, had an impact, especially at the time, like Starship Troopers does today.
Very much so. I mean, from the 1960s until now, as of us recording this video, you will have some of the best sci-fi authors and some of the worst hacks try to, ascertain what Heinlein was thinking. Some will say, "Oh, he was an openly fascist individual," and you have others saying, "Oh, he was a libertarian." The truth of the matter is, he was right in the middle. This is a thought experiment. It was never meant to be, "Oh, well, this is my utopia. It is militaristic. It is this. It is that. Everything else is wrong." No, this is designed to make you think. This is exactly why it's presented at West Point and every other naval academy, to force you to think. There's no answer. The answer is what you come up with it.
Exactly. And, so many military science fiction writers have tried to rip him off. The only one I think even really comes close is the guy who wrote Armor. And
He did. Now, that being said, it's not military science fiction, but it is science fiction. And the author himself basically said, "Yeah, I was inspired by Heinlein," and that is Orson Scott Card. We would not have Ender's Game if not for Heinlein. We would not have Warhammer 40K if not for Heinlein. We would not have Halo if not for Heinlein. It all roads lead to Rome.
all roads lead to Robert. Now, one of the aspects of the writing that I think really does kind of stand out is I think there's quite a bit of Japanese influence in this. A lot of stuff that you would expect from an American production just isn't really seen.
Very much so. In fact, the JGSDF has shown this before in the past to recruits. I don't know if they still do it because, well, like as stated, this only got one release, and that was in 1988. But for a long time, Starship Troopers was, not mandatory reading for the Japanese ground self-defense forces, but it was highly suggested reading. The only groups I know who have it as mandatory reading is the U.S. Navy. But this book, this type of fiction, is spread out almost every single nation worldwide, and it's read, whether it be mandatory or voluntary, by so many individuals every year who go through the process.
And it's really easy to see why. So, overall, that's the first 3 episodes. And, when I first started watching it, I was not... when it comes to some of these anime things, I did not know if it was going to be as good as or better than that 97 film. I didn't really know what I was getting into until I finally got to around the episode 2. But by episode 3, I was hooked.
It's pretty easy to get hooked into because there actually is a lot of character development and a lot of subtlety here. It is the antithesis of the popcorn movie. This is not disposable entertainment, that's kind of why it saddens me, the fact that there's been no real chasing this to get it re-released. While it's not disposable, it's being treated like it is.
Which is really quite sad all around because goddamn was this good. I mean, the characters are actually legitimately likable. Rico himself, the biggest surprise I had was that Rico himself was not this, ace kind of character. He was great at everything. He gets his ass kicked a lot in these 3 episodes. He doesn't win all the time. He has to really work at being the hero.
Yeah, for a coming-of-age story, it is proper coming-of-age. There are no Gary Stews, there are no Mary Sues. It's everybody's human, everybody bleeds, everybody's capable of a good fight. How far are you going to take it?
All right. Well, I am Generallotz, and we will see you in the next 3 episodes. And so I'm going to wish you good Gundam Wing.
And I'm going to wish you good Mortia pattern assault rifle, because why not?
You gotta love that Mini 14, or whatever, makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you this awesome content.